Welcome everyone to our Tisha B'av special, an evening where we discuss about how we treat one another and what happens when that goes wrong. Tonight you'll be treated to 7 talks from 7 speakers, hopefully all only taking 7 minutes each. If only I was in a loving environment. If only I lived in a beautiful home. If only I lived in Israel. If only I was surrounded by people who are constantly trying to lift me up. Imagine what I could achieve. If only. Throughout the year, when we hear people saying things like this, if only, we tell them, hey, you got to live in the right here, right now. As Marshall Mathers said, you only got one shot. You know, this opportunity comes within a lifetime. You got to live in the moment. Got to live in the moment. That's the message all year round. Let's not talk about a person, a place, or a thing which is holding us back. If only I had something else in my life. If only. But from tonight, for 25 hours, we wallow. We will wallow in the misery, oh man, I don't have that. For 24 hours, you're right. Wallow in it. What if? What if? Wouldn't it be amazing if I had those relationships? Wouldn't it be amazing if I was able to feel God in my life? Wouldn't it be amazing? Life would be so different, but we don't have it. And that should break our hearts. For 24 hours, we feel that. 24 hours. And 24 hours alone. In the midst of this grief, we ask ourselves, why? Why? Why was the temple destroyed on the 9th of Av? Twice. First temple and the second temple. Why? And we're taught a fascinating thing, that the reason why we lost them, the reason why the temple was destroyed, is because we forgot. We forgot the importance of the other, of how a life is about connection and unconditional giving. The root of all interpersonal relationships is the idea that I just want to give to someone else. And we forgot about that. And we became selfish. We forgot. And so we lost the deepest relationship. We lost the deepest, clearest relationships that we had. We lost a relationship with the Almighty. We lost our close relationships with the Jewish people. And we lost our relationships with ourselves. We lost clarity. And we mourn and we cry about that loss of clarity. It's tragic. But it was a blessing. It was something really, really amazing, something special, something we should actually be happy about. Really? Temples destroyed, and we should be happy about that? Let me tell you a story about a great-grandfather of mine who was called Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev. Rabbi Levi of Yitzchak of Berdichev lived around 200 years ago in Ukraine. And he would travel from town to town. And one night, he ended up in an inn. And in this town, the innkeeper saw the great rabbi, Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, and he says, hey, gives him the penthouse suite in his hotel. And Rabbi Levi Yitzchak had a tradition that every single night, throughout the year, at midnight, he would sit on the floor and he would cry over the loss of the temple, over that loss of clarity, over the loss of that relationship, of that feeling that when you come home and you just know that you're crying and things are going so bad, and you just walk into home and Daddy's here. That sense that we've lost that, and he would sit and he would cry over it. And Levi Yitzchak at midnight sits down and he begins to cry. But when Levi Yitzchak cries, it's deep. And he loses himself in his agony. And the innkeeper's hearing out for his VIP, and he comes upstairs because he hears crying. And he's He's listening in. He's, oh my goodness, is everything okay? He opens up the door. He's like, Rabbi, is something okay? Did somebody die? What can I do? Is something hurt? Like, what can I do? Rabbi, why are you sitting here crying on the floor? And the B'ditcher tells him, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak says, no, don't worry. The reason I'm crying is I'm crying over the temple, which was destroyed 2,000 years ago. And he's like, a temple was destroyed 2,000 years ago, and you're sitting here on the floor tonight crying about it? And the B'ditcher tells him, hey, yeah, I sit there crying because you know what? We had clarity and we had a relationship and spirituality was real to us and we were able to feel it tangibly in our bones that our Father loves us. And I cry that we don't have that anymore. I cry and I mourn about that. And the innkeeper has never thought of this before in his life, that you can have a deep and intimate relationship with Almighty. And he sits there and he begins to cry. Deep, deep tears, and he's sobbing. And he sits on the floor and his face is covered and he's crying and crying. And the B'ditcher gets worried that maybe this man who's already an older man, this innkeeper, that perhaps will have a heart attack from this. So he turns to him and says, Rabbi Yid, holy brother Jew, my friend, please don't cry. And he's like, no, but master, teacher, you just told me we lost the temple. I'm so sad. I've never thought about that before. And he says, no, don't you understand? It was the greatest thing in life that God destroyed the temple. It was the greatest gift. A gift? What do you mean? He destroyed the temple. How is that a good thing? We had a relationship and then it was gone. And he says, no, you don't understand. The Almighty really wanted to destroy the Jewish people. But instead of destroying the Jewish people, he chose and said, you know what? I have a beautiful palace. I have a home in Jerusalem, beautiful building, most beautiful building in the world. And God says, I'd rather destroy my own home than take it out of my children. So you know what? When God destroyed the temple, you know what that was saying? He loves us. He loves us. That's the most beautiful message in the world that you could possibly have. And the innkeeper hears this and he starts smiling. And the B'ditcher says, we should dance. And they get up and they start singing and dancing. And they're sitting around the room dancing in circles and circles and circles. And they're dancing. And people in the inn wake up. And they hear this ruckus going on at 12:30 at night. And they come up the stairs and they see this great rabbi, related to B'ditcher, and the elderly innkeeper just dancing in circles. And they say, what's going on? Mazel tov, who's engaged? And they said, no, didn't you hear? The temple was destroyed. The temple was destroyed. Destruction means he cares. Recognizing that he cares allows us to stop for a minute. And throughout the tears, throughout the depths of the emotional feelings that, you know, this relationship isn't the way it was, but the reason why we have a relationship the way it is today, the reason we're still around to even crave that relationship is because he loves us. And that should make us smile through the tears. I'm now going to be handing it over to our next speaker, the one and only Fegi Blumstein.
Thank you so much for that intro. And thank you all for joining us for tonight's program. A little pre-Tisha B'av ideas. And what I'm going to talk about tonight is actually something that follows Tisha B'av. So I'm one of those people who actually reads the end of the book before I get through the book. And that's because I just can't wait. The suspense is killing me. So the suspense was killing me when it comes to Tisha B'av, and I always like to look forward. So the Shabbos that actually follows Tisha B'av is called Shabbos Nachamu. Nachamu comes from the Hebrew word of comfort. Now it's interesting because why would a Shabbos that follows the saddest day of the year be a Shabbos of comfort? The reason it's called Shabbos Nachamu is because the Haftorah that we read on Tisha B'av, on the Shabbos that follows Tisha B'av, is from the holy words of Yeshaya, where it begins saying, Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami. My nation is now comforted. So when you think of comfort, you do not think of destruction. You do not think of desolation. You don't think of people dying and people fasting and Holocaust and inquisitions. What I think of is when I think of comfort is definitely pasta, pizza, anything with carbs, because that's really what kind of comforts me. But ultimately, this Shabbos is called the Shabbos of comfort. So in order to understand why it's comforting, because we're talking about such terrible things that are happening on Tisha B'av, we need to understand a story that took place during the time of the destruction of the Second Temple. So Rabbi Akiva, who was very famous for teaching the oral Torah, he taught a lot in the Gemara. If you go through the Gemara, it's all about Rabbi Akiva said this and Rabbi Akiva said that. And he was an incredible person. He only started studying Torah when he was 40 years old. He amassed many, many, many students. And at the end of his life, he actually witnessed the Romans destroying and burning down the Second Temple. And after everything was ravished, the scene was as follows. Kind of reminds me a little bit of The Lion King, Pride Rock, when Mufasa was dead and Scar was there, and with all the hyenas, and everything was just ravaged and ruined, and there was no food and people were hungry. Well, the animals were hungry. And everything was so terrible. So I kind of like have that image in my head. And I imagine Rabbi Akiva walking with his colleagues on top of Temple Mount. And the Romans actually destroyed the temple, but not only did they destroy it and burn it down, they plowed Temple Mount. There was nothing there. And they were walking there, and foxes, similar to the hyenas from Pride Rock, were walking, and all of his colleagues were crying, and they were big Torah scholars, and they were so saddened by everything that had happened now from the destruction of the temple. And Rabbi Akiva's laughing. And you would think, like, he's one of those guys who like laughs at a funeral, or one of those people who, when they get in trouble with the principal, they start laughing. They're like, Rabbi Akiva, like, what's going on? Why are you laughing? And he says, my fellow scholars, my colleagues, let me tell you something. We were told in prophecy that we were going to have the temple. We were told in prophecy that things were going to be glorious and grand. We were also told in prophecy that we are going to worship idols. We're going to commit adultery. We're going to do terrible things. We're going to have baseless hatred, and the temple's going to be destroyed. And we were told about this moment specifically. We were told that we are going to be walking Temple Mount. It's going to be plowed, and shu'alim, foxes, are going to be running wild. Devastation is going to be. And if all of these prophecies have come true, then the prophecy of the third temple being built and us being taken out of exile is also going to become true. And when they heard that, they said, Akiva nichamtanu, you have comforted us, because now we know that the true building of the Beit HaMikdash, the third one, which will be forever, is going to stand and is going to come. So this word nichamtanu is interesting. As opposed to the word Yeshua, which is a redemption, where, God forbid, if somebody gets terrible news and they find out they have cancer, or somebody finds out that they've lost their job, or somebody is, does not have children, they pray and they cry to Hashem and they ask him for a redemption from this difficulty. And that is called a Yeshua. You had cancer and you were cured. You didn't have a job and now you have a livelihood. You didn't have children and now you have a child. As opposed to the word nechama. What does nechama mean? By the way, it just happens to be my youngest child, who was born the day after Tisha B'av. Therefore, we named her Nechama because of that, because she was a Nechama after Tisha B'av. Nechama means that everything that has happened to me, all the things that I've gone through, all the devastation, all the destruction, all the exile, was there to make me better. And right now, Akiva was standing there on Temple Mount, and he's like, all of this bad has happened to us, but I know that everything that was put there and every difficulty in my life was there for me to grow from and was a good thing. And they said, Akiva nichamtanu, you've comforted us, because we understand that eventually, when the third temple will be rebuilt, it'll be there forever. So with the Shabbos after Tisha B'av is called Shabbos Nachamu. We're comforted because we know that although we're in exile, and though things are difficult, and although we have enemies, and there's anti-Semitism, and there's baseless hatred, and people are arguing and fighting, and things aren't good, we know that eventually everything that we've been through is there to comfort us as a Nechama, to teach us that all those things that we've gone through will be there for us to grow from, and to guide us to eventually to the third temple. Now, our next speaker, Tali, who's coming up, is actually a colleague of mine, close friend of mine, and we work together in the Ignite program, and she's a perfect rock star. And she's going to teach us a little bit about the idea of baseless hatred and tell us a very fascinating story about Kamsa or Bar Kamsa. Definitely not one of the bedtime stories that your mom has told you. So I give it over to Tali. Take it away. And I hope you all have an easy and meaningful fast.
Thank you, baby. Hi, everyone. So in less than 2 hours, we're starting Tisha B'av, the date where bad things have always seemed to happen. We know that the first temple was destroyed, second temple was destroyed, and until now, bad things keep happening that day. So the first temple was destroyed, and then the second was rebuilt. But since the second, we have been more than 2,000 years waiting for the third one to be rebuilt. So why was the second temple destroyed? So we can work on that and rebuild the third temple. We know that the second temple was destroyed because of sinat hinam, called baseless hatred. But what is that? Usually, you hate someone, there has to be a reason. To say this, I want to tell you the known story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. They say that because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, the temple was destroyed. So the story goes as follows. There is a man who is throwing an amazing party. And he has a friend called Kamsa and has an enemy called Bar Kamsa. So he sends a messenger to send the invitation to his friend Kamsa. But the messenger got confused and sent it instead to Bar Kamsa. Bar Kamsa sees this letter and says, okay, maybe he wants to do peace. I'll go to the party. He gets to the party, and suddenly the person that's throwing the party, called the Balasuda, sees him and says, what are you doing here? Well, you invited me. I said, no, I didn't invite you. Of course I didn't. There has to be a confusion. So Bar Kamsa said, yeah, I'm sorry, but I'm already here. Like, let me stay. So he says, no, just leave. So he say, no, like, let me stay. I'll pay for my own plate, but let me stay. It's too embarrassing. He says, no, you have to go now. Bar Kamsa says, I'll pay for half of the party. Just please let me stay. And the Balasuda says, no, until Bar Kamsa says, please, I'll pay for the whole party. Just let me stay. He says, no. And that was it. Bar Kamsa leaves the party feeling so mad, angry, and he saw like no one stood up, so disappointed. So because of this anger, he went to the Caesar of Rome. And he said, I don't know if you heard about this, but the Jews are rebelling against you. So the Caesar said, no, that's not true. He said, like, no, I'm telling you they're rebelling against you. He's like, look, send a korban, a sacrifice, to the temple, and you see they're not going to sacrifice it, and that's because they're rebelling against you. So the Caesar said, okay, look, I'll send you this animals are perfect, send them, and you'll see it's going to be all good. Bar Kamsa take this animal, and when he was on the way there, he did a small cut. Some people say it was on the mouth, and some people say it was in the eyes. So when you do a blemish on the animal, you can't offer it. You get to the temple, and there's a huge dilemma for the rabbis. What should we do? Do we offer it? Do we not offer it? For the peace, maybe, but we don't want to give the bad idea. Should we kill Bar Kamsa? No, that's not a good idea. Long story short, they decided they're not gonna offer them, and also Bar Kamsa he went back to the Caesar of Rome and said, you see, they didn't end up offering this sacrifice. And unfortunately, we all know the end of the story. The Romans thought we were rebelling against us, and the end of the story was that the second temple was destroyed. And we could see here that we can take a lot of things of the story, but I think the main point was here the baseless hatred we had. There was here. We say that that it didn't matter if Bar Kamsa, it doesn't matter how, if he even decided that he was going to pay for the whole party, he still did not want him there. His existence bothered him, even if he wanted to pay for, how we said, the whole party. And of course, I can imagine there was a fight between of them. I'm not saying you're not allowed to discuss, sometimes you get a little angry, have different opinions. But the question is, to what degree? When it already comes to the degree that the existence of the other person bothers you, and when your ego can't stand that person succeed, it's translated as baseless hatred. And that the problem is that when baseless hatred starts, it's an ongoing chain. And it's when you start focusing on the negative of the negative part of the other people. And it comes from you deciding not to love every single Jew, that their existence is on the way of your existence. That what they do is not letting you go where you want to go, and want them not to be in your life. And that is the root of destruction. We know that every Jew is part of this, how I call, like, an amazing puzzle. And if one piece is not there, then we're not completed. We don't always agree. We have different discussions, different opinions, but we work towards having ahavat chinam, having this constant love, and loving every single Jew because they are part of who you are, part of the Jewish people. I just want to end by telling this story one of my rabbis told me. There was this important rabbi called Rabbi Yaakov Yitzchak, and he was famous in the 19th century. And he decided he was going to go do some fundraising for the poor people in Europe. So he goes to a very rich man, and he says, like, hi. He was very low key. He didn't even say he was that rabbi. I'm looking for money for the poor people. And at that point, he said, look, you look like someone who can go to work. You don't have to ask me for money, just go. So he's like, okay. That rabbi who was very low in ego just left. And then suddenly a friend of the rich man comes and said, like, you're not going to believe who I just saw on the street. I just saw Rabbi Yaakov Yitzchak walking there. And the rich person was like, wow, I just treated really badly this rabbi, this really famous rabbi. So he ran back to the rabbi. He ran. He saw the rabbi. He's like, I'm so sorry. I didn't treat you with the deserve your, like, you need it. You're a gadol, like such an amazing rabbi. I'm so sorry. And the rabbi said, no, you don't have to ask me for forgiveness. Not at all. What you have to ask is for forgiveness to all the other Jews that you think they do not respect, they do not deserve your honor. They do not deserve your respect. They do not deserve to be felt like they're part of your people. I really hope that this year we start working on Havat Israel, that we realize that each Jew is responsible for one another, that every soul is part of what we say our puzzle, and that everyone is indispensable, and that we should love everyone just because they are part of our family. Now I want to introduce Rabbi Blachman. Rabbi Blachman is a rabbi of mine, a colleague of mine also. He runs Manhattan Midrash, and we have so much to learn from him. So Rabbi Blachman, can't wait to hear what you have to say. Thank you.
Okay, hi, I'm sorry. Thank you. I was muted. Thank you, Tali, for these inspiring, amazing words. So the title of my class was basically, I was assuming that you're going to hear a lot from my colleagues about the darkness of this day. And I wanted to discuss more about how do we relate to this day by seeing what's going to lead the future. But I think what Fegi was discussing before, I think that there's something very, very important that we have to discuss. That I think it's so painful for me that Tisha B'av is not. It's not relatable. It's not. It's not. If Tisha B'av, it's about that day 2,000 years ago. There was a building that was constructed, or the one before, or even the story of the Meraglim, or the story of Bar Kamsa. All these stories is let's be honest, it wouldn't take our heart right now. It wouldn't. And if yes, well, please give me a blessing, because I am not connected to that. Some people trying to connect the Holocaust to this concept, but no, the Tisha B'av, the 9th of Av, is not about the Holocaust too. What is that about? Before we trying to connect to the light, well, let's discuss the destruction for a second. What's the destruction? So right now we're supposed to feel a little bit hard, a bit bad, to feel sad. I'm sorry, not bad. What's there that we're supposed to feel sad? Because if it's about the Holocaust, it's not today. If it's about the bad things that happened to the Jewish people, it's wrong. It's not what we're supposed to feel bad. It's not even to feel bad, sad about destruction of the temple. I tell you what I think is there that we're supposed to feel sad, and I think this is something that maybe will help for you to actually bring the light after the dark. It says in the Talmud, it says that the reason why the first temple was destructed, because the Jewish people were not functioning as Jews, right? They were immoral in in their families. They were murdering their idol worshippers. Okay, that I understand. The second temple, it says, like Tali told us, that the reason why the second temple was destructed is because basis hatred. Now let's come on. Like, I understand it's not a nice thing, but for that, God destruct the temple? Literally, is that something that defined like the relationship between the Jewish people and God, that we literally, the temple has to be destructed? So you know what's the answer? The answer is yes. But why? You know, the story, I think you already heard that the story really started with the 12 spies coming back and telling the Jewish people that the land of Israel is a horrible place. We don't want to be there. It says the Jewish people cried, and God says, if that's the case, you cried now for no reason, you're going to have a reason. Really? That's the way God really interact with his people? But I'll tell you what, there's a secret. There's a verse that added to this story in last week Torah portion, where Moshe Rabbeinu is re-saying the story and tell the Jewish people that standing right in front of them another part of the story that wasn't written before. And the verse goes like this. It says, "V'teragnu be'oaleichem." They went and you were kvetching in your tents. V'tomru, and you said, "Besinat Hashem otanu," because God's hating us. He took us out of Egypt. For what? To kill us here in the desert. The Jewish people, the Maharsha, one of the commentaries on the Shas explained, he says, you know what happened there? The parents went in to the homes, hugging their kids and saying, you will die. It's like literally the kids, you know the story, the pictures of the parents like saying goodbye to their kids right before they're going into the trains to Auschwitz. The Jewish people were sitting in their tents and crying and saying, "You kid's gonna die." You know, because God hating us, and you're going to die. And now Moshe Rabbeinu is talking to those kids right before they enter into the land of Israel. And he tells them, you know why those 40 years happened? You know why you didn't go into the land of Israel? Because you parents literally based hatred who? God. They said, God, because he hates us, he brought us here. Instead of appreciating everything that God told us and gave us through the whole going out of Egypt, all the miracles, what we said? You know, oh, because we went in, we are so blinded. We're into, and we got brainwashed by the spies that took it blinded us to say God hating us. That put inside the Jews a concept where they could literally, there's something that's going to go in their mind and creates them so blinded and so not appreciative. So the second temple, it says that the Jewish people, they're practicing Torah. So how come we destruct? Because their basis hatred in each other, the basis hatred God. What's the big deal? The Mishnah and Avos, our sages teaching us in the Mishnah, it says that if someone that is not appreciative of the good that his brother and his fellow does to him, at the end of the day, he wouldn't appreciate what God does to him. The temple is destructed, you know why? Yes, we're practicing Torah, but the practicing was because we saw Torah as because we got used to it. It wasn't something that we used to tool of connection to God. We forgot who God is. We literally forgot who God is. Yes, we did practice Torah. But that basis hatred is the same basis hatred that was started then, where there are people saying, you know what? God is not only exists, maybe he exists, but he's hating us. And Moshe Rabbeinu crying and saying, you know what? That's exactly the opposite of why God created the world. God created the world because everything he wanted is sha'ayar, it's leitiv. What he wanted is to give and to share and to have the connection with us. You know what's the destruction that we should feel right now? Because God is a word that 80% of Jews don't connect to. God became a word that it sounds like Christianity. When the Pope speaks, you have millions of people watching him. We have millions of Christians before they go and eat, they say grace. How many Jews do that? How many Jews know that God is something that the Almighty is the reason why we exist? And he's craving for our connection. The temple is a physical item that exists in this world that is showing appreciation of God to the connection to us. He wants us to connect to something even physical. How could we even think about how this is something that we're missing if we're living out? God doesn't have TikTok. He doesn't have Instagram, so he's a passé. That's what we're living in. How many people we all know that for them Judaism is culture. God is not in the picture. This is the biggest distraction. We have something that no one else have. We have, God shows us because he wants us to connect to him. Because we are the people that having that torch. And 80% of Jews don't appreciate it and don't know anything about it. That's the generation we live in. This is the biggest destruction exist in history. Take this one day and reflect about it. What does that mean? I was created a Jew and it doesn't mean anything to me. Because this is the biggest destruction. If you can go through this day and thinking that this day that's how I'm gonna bring. You know how God gonna come back? It's actually amazing. It says that there's a verse in Eicha we say when we finish our the one of the prayers that we say in tonight, and we cry to God, Ashivenu Hashem Elecha, God, please bring us back. V'nashuva chadesh yomeinu kukedem, bring back the days like it used to be. It's written in the Megillah, Ashivenu v'nashuva. It's supposed to be written with a hey at the end. And the hey, it's a resembling of the name of God. It's written without a a. You know why? Because as just told us that in the days of Mashiach will come, the Jewish people wouldn't, even Mashiach will come, the Jewish people will be so comfortable where they are, they wouldn't want to go back. The Seddish knew that we're not going to be connected. But guess what? This time Mashiach will come anyways. But how do you want to go? You want to come to the days of Mashiach when they tell you about God and you will say, like, Judaism, it's about Jewish humor? Or you want to be the person that would say, this is something I was craving so much. Thank you, God. The Mashiach is coming and the Beis HaMikdash was built again. Mashiach is coming back. Let's be ready. Let's do Chadesh Yomeinu Kekedem, where our forefathers, at least, you know what, blamed God, hated about us for the bad things that happened to us. Today, we don't even forget that there is God. Please, I'm begging you, use this day. Use this day to remember there is something that we have that no one else have. And the biggest destruction is if we ignore it. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit over here. I want to introduce the one and only, my biggest friend, and I am his biggest fan, the one and only Rabbi Lynn.
How do you follow that, Rabbi Blachman? I'm done. Finish me off. Okay, beautiful. Thank you, Rabbi Blachman, for the inspiration. So let's talk about what would have been. Okay, what would have been? That's my little segment here. And the question is like, why are we asking what would have been? What went wrong? What didn't happen that should have happened that we can say what would have been? Okay, so the 9th of Av, tonight, tomorrow, this day, Tisha B'av, it's a calendar date in the Torah itself, and that story is the story of the Jews as they were on the precipice of going into the land of Israel. They decided to send in spies, a mission to perceive the military strategy that they needed, and to go in and scout out the land and see, like, military, what are we to do? We know God's with us, but he wants us to fight a war. So we asked Moses, hey, can we go and send out a reconnaissance mission to check everything out? Moshe agreed. He said, okay, fine. If that's what you need, no problem. And God says later in the Torah, you were right for allowing them to go because that's what they needed. They went in and they came back, and Moshe was very clear, like, what they should look for, and prayed on their behalf. But they came back and they did something wrong. They came back and they spoke words in a way that clearly was driven by an agenda. And that agenda was really kind of to keep the Jews from going in this way right now. And they came back and they spoke Lashon Hara, they spoke evil speech about the land of Israel. They didn't say it's hot and gross and disgusting. They said, like, the people, they emphasized certain things. The people are very large, they're very strong, the cities are fortified. They started out good, but the conversation changed. And what happened was the Jewish people, who were on shpilkas, as they say in Yiddish, shpilkas, were already anxious about going in and the war with these nations that are warring nations, and they were concerned. And they had a little bit of a breach in their faith, even though they'd seen plagues, the sea splitting, miracles in the desert, Mount Sinai, the whole thing. They'd seen everything. Nonetheless, to go into that realm of existence, what the land of Israel represented, which was walking on your own 2 feet, the miracles are going to subside, God's going to let you go, and you're going to have to go on your own, etc. And you're going to have to till the soil and, irrigate the fields and whatever. Fight wars. They were anxious, they were apprehensive. And the sages, the spies took advantage of that. And they gave them the wrong talk. And therefore the Jewish people then cried because they heard what was being said, that we're not going to make it, it's not going to work, we're all going to die, and it's going to be horrible. And they cried and they cried and cried. And the sages teach us that God said at that point, you're crying for nothing over here, this will be the day you cry forever. Now, tonight we're supposed to be talking about, relationships between fellow Jews, between people. So what does this story have to do with interpersonal relationships and how we can treat each other better? And what can we actually tap into and think about over here on this day where we're really supposed to, this is like a chiropractor of the spirit, okay? Just like crack the neck and crack the spine, and that's what Tisha B'av is supposed to do for your spiritual health, okay, and equilibrium. So what happened over here is very subtle, but powerful. It changed everything. Because had we not sinned, had we gone right in, we would have walked into Israel. Moses would have come with us. He never got to go in the end. He would have come with us. We would have built the temple. It could never have been destroyed. And we would be living in the Messianic era. Exactly what it says, nation will not lift sword against nation, lion will lie with the lamb, swords beaten into plowshares, there'd be no sickness, there'd be no war, we would live in a Messianic era, which we're waiting for around the corner right now, but we wouldn't have needed thousands and thousands of years of exile, right, and trial and trauma and everything. We wouldn't have needed that. We would have gone right in, and everything would have been hunky-dory in a Messianic era, where all you could do was serve God and grow in great spiritual heights with no impediments, nothing in your way. That's what would have been. Why didn't that happen? Okay, why didn't that happen? It's an amazing thing. Because you have to be careful how you influence other people. Because the spies went in, they were leaders, and they came back and they did not choose their words carefully. And they spoke in a way that provoked. They spoke in a way that spoke to the weakness of people. They spoke in a way where their words would find devilish partnership in others. They spoke in a way that didn't lift people up. It didn't make people feel they could do it. It didn't rise a nation up to the heights that they should be. They didn't inspire. They brought everybody down. How often do we walk around thinking to ourselves what responsibility I have to other people, how I speak to them? Do we think about that? Even the hellos that we give, do you ever think about, like, people are coming to you and they're asking, advice or a conversation? I have all the opportunity in the world to say anything in the world I can to a person. Do I think before I see the person? Can I say the right thing to them? Can I speak to them in a way that lifts them up, that gives them a vision of themselves, that gives them hope and gives them goodness and gives them all the things we want for people? Do I use my speech to do that, or do I use my speech, God forbid, for something else? Do I allow my ego, my ulterior motives to weave their way in my words and come out and affect people negatively? How do I impact people with how I speak to them, what I could say? Your words are the most powerful thing you have. They're the most powerful thing you have. God created the world with speech. He doesn't have a mouth. He used the medium of speech in order to teach us the power. Our sages teach us that the thing which is human about us as opposed to animalistic, our godly image is ruach v'malala, the power of speech, the spirit that is in speech. God created the world with speech. We can create life and death with speech. We can give people the words, those close to us, our friends, our family, people in the street, Jews, everywhere, anybody. You can lift them up with words, or you can destroy them with words. These spies went into the land of Israel and came back, and their words were clouded, and their words had ulterior motives, and it destroyed a nation. They couldn't go, that whole generation couldn't go in. And we've been suffering Holocaust and pogroms and inquisitions and expulsions and everything because of that. It wouldn't have been. Had they come back and just said it in a way with, like, how can I make these people great? How can I lift them up to the level they should be at so they are clear and faithful and confident and they can go into the land of Israel and fulfill the mission of Jewish people? How can I speak to them in the right way? They didn't know how to do that. Even if they did, they didn't do it. We have to be careful with how we speak to people, not just to avoid the bad things, to avoid gossip and stupidity and lies and harshness and all that garbage. We have to think about the positive. What can your speech do? What can you say to people that can make them realize they are loved and they are awesome and they are infinite and they're incredible and they are godly? What can you say to make people feel that way? That's what you have to think about. I want to move on now to the next part of this evening, okay, and introduce one of my oldest colleagues. We've been working together for a very long time in many different capacities, Rabbi Jack Cohen. Wishing everybody a meaningful...
Thanks, Rabbi Lynn.
Fast.
Thank
There you
you
go.
for the warm welcome. Hi, everyone. My name is Jack Cohen. I'm the Director of Education for Manhattan, and I wanted to share with you a thought about anti-Semitism, which seems to be, unfortunately, one of the topics of the day, amidst the at least two other major topics of the day, coronavirus and racism. Anti-Semitism, which we know has been on the rise, was kind of swept to the bottom of the pile and has kind of risen back up now. And the question is, you know, are we anti-Semitism? Well, of course we are. We're anti-Semitism. We're anti-racism. We have to defend people's dignity. We have to defend Jews' dignity. We have to defend people's right to live. We, of course, have to defend Jews' right to live in security and safety. But the interesting thing is that as we rush to snuff out anti-Semitism, which Jews, as I said, should do, we can maybe not hear the message that God might be sending us through that anti-Semitism. I can't speculate about the messages, behind coronavirus and racism in general, but anti-Semitism seems to hit really close to home. What could it be that God's trying to tell us through it? So, as many of you remember, a few months ago, there was a group of Jews in Brooklyn who, after clearing with the mayor's office, they decided to host a funeral for their rabbi on the streets of Brooklyn. At that time, it was very intense. We didn't really know anything about coronavirus, not that we know that much more right now, but they were out there in the streets, and apparently some of the social distancing guidelines weren't kept exactly to the T. It was a huge thing. As you also may remember, the mayor issued a statement warning the entire Jewish community, which I believe is something like 2 million Jews in New York City, to be careful, that this is like a last warning to be careful with coronavirus guidelines. And many Jews were appalled. Say, how could he do this? How could he group us all together? You know, I had an interesting experience. Someone I know came to me and said, you know, you must be really upset by all of this. And I was like, well, I mean, why? She was a Jewish woman. She said, well, why me? Like, why not us? Like, why aren't we all upset by this? And what she then insisted by saying is, you know, Orthodox Jews, because, you know, you're easily confused with those Orthodox Jews. And and of course, to which I said to her, you know, we're all Jews. And the amazing thing about anti-Semitism is that in the end, we all get grouped together, as we've seen recently, right? In more recent anti-Semitism, the expulsion expelled all of the Jews. The Nazis they didn't ask you if you were Reform or Orthodox. They didn't do IQ tests before putting you on the cattle cart. They didn't distinguish. Hezbollah rockets, suicide attacks, they don't distinguish. The trolls on social media, they don't distinguish. They just group all the Jews together. And if we understand anti-Semitism from this perspective, that anti-Semitism is the finger pointing at us saying, you're a Jew. It's like, no, I'm a this Jew, I'm a conservative Jew, I'm an Orthodox Jew, I'm a modern Orthodox Jew, I'm a yeshivish Jew, I'm a Haredi Jew, I'm a Reformed Jew, I'm an unaffiliated Jew, I'm a cultural Jew. It's like, no, you're a Jew. You are a Jew. So that is actually a great gift. Number one, because it reminds us of who we are. But in terms of what the message I want to convey is, it reminds us that we're really all the same. And that's a message that unfortunately it takes an anti-Semite to get across to us. Many Jews I know, their Jewish identity was ignited by anti-Semitism. And because that's what it takes. It takes someone to group us all together. And in that sense, the anti-Semites are right. The anti-Semites are right. We're all the same. Ultimately, we're all the same. And there's something about all humans which is all the same, right? Which is, of course, the message behind racism. And what we need to be inspired by on this Tisha B'av, if we could say such a thing, right? Tisha B'av, these 25 hours, they're not known to be uplifting, but if you have you take a sober look at the events throughout Jewish history, a sober look at the anti-Semitism that's persecuted us, and you ignore the anti-Semites, consider the anti-Semites like extras in the movie. Right or wrong, the mayor for grouping all Jews together, it doesn't matter. Let's ignore that. Let's hear the message from God, who's speaking through anti-Semitism throughout the generations. The message is clear. And then if we really take it to heart and are inspired by it, we realize that we as Jews have an opportunity, and this is where we need to focus this Tisha B'av. And I think at this point in history, especially, we need to realize that we have one of the most important opportunities in the history of the world. The Jewish people, unlike every other people, is like a United Nations. Maybe that's why the United Nations downtown doesn't like us so much. Because we have Jews of all colors. We have Jews with all kinds of customs who speak all the languages on the face of the earth. You can find a Jew who speaks it. And we're meant to coexist. We're meant to have not just coexist, we're meant to have a thriving community together. And if you go to Israel, especially, it shouldn't have to be, and we shouldn't know any more rockets or any more attacks, but especially when the rocket siren blares, Jews become united. And for that, we have to say thank you to the anti-Semites, but really the thank you is to God, who's sending us these messages. With that said, I want to introduce my dear friend and colleague for many years, who is stepping down from Orman Han and stepping up to help many more people very soon, Rabbi Yoni Spinka. He's been a coach for me and for many others, and that's one of the things he's pursuing right now, to really help people become their best selves. And he has the final message for us as we enter into Tisha B'av. Rabbi Yoni Spinka.
Thank you, Rabbi Jack. Okay, well, friends, we are just about an hour away from entering into the saddest day on the Jewish calendar. It's the National Day of Mourning, Tisha B'av. And for some of us, it's kind of, it's difficult to kind of grasp what the day should really be about and why we should be so sad and what the purpose of it is. And I wanted to kind of speak about this idea about how we can actually build off this day and use it as a tool to help build communities that are happy. That's going to be the base. And, you know, with other types of mourning, a more classic type of mourning, unfortunately, if somebody loses a loved one, we go from this period of intense mourning. Then there's a next period of 7 days, which are less, called the Shiva. Then there's a 30-day Shloshim, and then a year. We go from a high intensity of experiencing and feeling the loss to then decreasing the sadness. And yet when it comes to this sad day, it's the opposite. We start with a period known as 3 weeks. Then we enter into the 9 days. And now finally we enter into the sad day of Tisha B'av. Because it's quite hard. It's quite hard to connect to pain that is so long ago, that is so distant, the destruction of the temple. It seems very difficult to relate to. So we have to kind of build up to it. And even by you coming together for this hour and hearing ideas, that's part of the preparation. So I wanted to speak about this concept of what it means to take sadness and bring it to happiness. There's a famous line from the Talmud that says, Kol hamis'abel al Yerushalayim, anyone who mourns over the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, zoicha v'roya b'simchasa, he will merit and to see it in its rejoiced state. That's the statement from the Talmud. And many people are bothered by this sort of comparison here, that if we, on the one hand, mourn, we get to merit to see it over the destruction, we get to merit to see it not in its rebuilt state, but in its joyous state. And it seems a bit strange. I would expect the Talmud to sort of make the corollary, which is that if you understand the destruction, you mourn it, you get to see the rebuilding. And yet it doesn't focus on the rebuilding of Jerusalem. It emphasizes the aspect of rejoicing. And that's remarkable. And we're going to try and see and understand why that is. So for those of you that have been to Israel, you will know that the center of the whole country is Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, the holy city of Jerusalem. So we have the north, we have the south, and when you get to the middle of the country, you have Jerusalem. And that is considered to be holier, a higher level of spiritual energy is placed in Jerusalem than the rest of the land of Israel. And obviously Israel being holier than the rest of the lands of the earth. Within Jerusalem, we're told that this place called Har Habayit, Temple Mount, that is the holiest area within Jerusalem. As we go further onto Temple Mount, we enter into the area known as the Beit HaMikdash, the grounds for the temple, the Kotel HaMaravi, the western wall that we all pray at when we go, is the last remnants of that temple. That temple, though, that part of it, the western wall, is actually the least holy of the whole temple. It's only the very outer wall. And we're told that as we go further into the area, we enter this area known as the Kedoshim, the holy area. So the western wall is the exterior. Then we enter into the area known as the Kedoshim, the holy area. And within the holy area, there's this even holier place called the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies. What's inside that place? It's something called the Aron HaKodesh, the Holy Ark. And inside the Aron, inside this Ark, are two angelic-like child figures. And we're told that when God is happy with us, they embrace and they hug. And when we're not doing what we should be doing, it turns around. When the Romans came to destroy the temple, they found these two Kruvim, these two angelic children, embracing. It was God's message to us that during the time of pain and destruction, I'm with you. I'm embracing you. I'm feeling your pain. It's so hard during the year to focus on other people's pain because we all have our own problems. The goal of Tisha B'av, of this day, is to take the tragedy of God's removal from the temple, God's presence, the recognition of godliness in the world, and try to see the destruction that that's brought to everybody. If we are able to focus on other people's pain, then and only then can we rejoice in their happy occasions. And I think the message of the Talmud here is that when you can see the destruction and you can feel people's pain, you can empathize. Now I can be with you in a joyous occasion. How do you build a community of happiness? You have to build a community of caring people. When we care for others and we sincerely feel that their lives matter, and I'm able to actually feel it and empathize with them, now I can rejoice in their joyous occasions because I've empathized in a way that's real and genuine. That is really the message. So as we are about to enter into this sad day, it is not a day just to be sad, it's a day to focus on loss, to focus on pain, so that we can be directed to lead a life and build a world that is that much more empathetic. And that is the way to build a community of happiness. Thank you for joining us in this learning series together. And may we all have a meaningful fast, and may the temple be rebuilt speedily in our days.